I would like to warmly welcome everybody to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle here at Still and Moving Center. And I would like to particularly welcome Lani Kwon, who will be giving us a brief presentation on our theme for today, which is Awakening to Potential. This is in the year when we have been focusing on self-crafting. So seeing our potential is so important in terms of actually bringing it out. And so Lani, who is a life coach and who has studied psychology, is going to be pulling from the humanist psychology tradition, in particular from the thoughts of Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers. And without further ado, I would like to introduce my dear friend, Lani Kwon.
Thank you so much, Renee. It's wonderful to see everyone, wonderful to see familiar faces as well as new friends I've not yet met. Just delighted to be able to take part. First of all, some gratitude to take part in this way on Zoom and to be able to share something that has been really meaningful in my work as well as in my personal life. And many of you are probably familiar. If not, you will become familiar with the work of Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers. They were psychologists who came on the heels of Freudian psychoanalysis and behavioral therapy. So things like conditioned responses and things of that nature. And just as an overview of what we'll cover today, I wanted to introduce who those people are, the main theories that they proposed, and then also how that can impact us today in our own lives, and how modern psychologists have taken their work even further. Though before we even begin that, I want to just offer us a moment of centering. And this comes out of my daily meditation practice, where it doesn't have to be a long, hour-long practice. It can be as short as a few seconds or even a minute. So if you could go ahead and close your eyes and make yourself comfortable. If you're seated, making sure that your feet are touching the ground, whole foot, as we say in Nia, and that your sit bones are aligned, your spine is not tense, but almost as if a thread is pulling you up from the top of your head and just loosely holding you up without any tension. You may notice areas of tension as you sit, and feel free to make any movement adjustments you need to be comfortable in this moment. Noticing at this moment your breathing, noticing thoughts that are coming in, just arriving fully here in this present moment. Noticing sensations depending on what part of the world you're in. You may be chilly or you may be warm. So noticing all of these things, I'm noticing someone coming up the path and just noticing outside sounds and exterior sensations or sounds. Noticing how they impact your interior. What thoughts and emotions come up as you're becoming more aware of the sensations or emotions or thoughts. And at this moment, you can also notice your breathing pattern. Are you holding your breath, or is your breath smooth and even? An even inhale with a pause at the top, an even exhale with a pause at the bottom. Just noticing your breath and bringing yourself to this moment. Thoughts, feelings, sensations come up. We just notice them. We notice that we can observe them and that we are not our thoughts, emotions, or sensations. We're not even really our breathing. We're something else, observing it. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and just sense and notice what's different from when we started. So one of the things I love about the humanistic perspective in psychology is it came out of a time contrasting to Freudian psychology, which, really focused on your conditioning as you were growing up, with your mother, your history, sexual conditioning as people grew up, and then also what he called stages of development. And then the behavioral therapists are focusing on how we can modify behaviors, almost, looking at us as a human animal. How do we modify behaviors to treat and address mental illness? And those are both very excellent therapies and perspectives, and in no way to put them down, but they are very circumscribed in their approach, each of those particular theories. And the humanists, the humanistic psychologists, wanted to take it beyond mental illness. They wanted to work with people who were already healthy and who wanted to enhance their lives. And, what's really amazing about this is these two psychologists, Maslow was born in 1908 and he passed away in 1970. Carl Rogers, born in 1902, passed away in 1987. They're contemporary with many of us. Many of us started our careers or were on the tail end of our careers or entering college, in my case, when they passed away. So I just want to point out that these theories are very recent, and yet they've had a huge impact on the way professionals do their work and the way that many people live their lives today, with the assumption that it's not only important to enhance your life and live your best life, so to speak, but to really, if you already are mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually healthy, how can you improve your life? The idea that there's something better, even after you've attained the basics in life. But I wanted to talk about Maslow's pyramid or hierarchy of needs. And they're often structured in a triangle or a pyramid. And I believe there's an image that our support staff can bring up to show. Thank you so much. In a nutshell, at the very bottom of Maslow's theory is that your physiological needs need to be cared for first. Our survival needs, our food, our shelter, water. I would include healthcare in that, before you could have other needs met. Our safety needs are right on top of that, being able to feel safe. And certainly during the pandemic, many of us have had varying experiences with feeling safe, feeling protected and cared for by our families or by the larger government and so forth. The next level is the need for love and relationships, the ability to connect not just in romantic relationships, but also friendships and extended family. And I really feel, Renee is a dear friend of mine. She's also like a mentor and a sister to me. She's my Nia sister as well as my Nia mentor. And so these relationships that we have with one another that are family-like, even if they're not blood relations. The next level up is self-esteem needs, the ability to feel you've done a great job or do work that's meaningful, to make a difference in the world in some way, an impact. And it doesn't have to be, being famous or a celebrity or anything like that, though it could be. It's more about a fulfillment of our purpose in life. And then at the very top, the pinnacle of his hierarchy of needs is self-actualization. And self-actualization, is a process of fulfillment. It's the ultimate ability to bring your soul's purpose into the world, share that with others, connect with others who are doing something similar, and create a better experience for everyone. That is the pyramid or hierarchy of needs. And, his theory was that you had to meet the bottom needs first, the basic needs first, before you could reach any of the higher needs. And we'll definitely discuss, in our interchange, whether or not we think that's true, whether or not there are times when we go back and forth between the different levels, or maybe we're addressing different aspects of different levels at different times. And then I just wanted to mention a quote by Abraham Maslow. He says, "Any theory of motivation that is worthy of attention must deal with the highest capacities of the healthy and strong person, as well as the defensive maneuvers of crippled spirits." So he really was, in his work, addressing not just the people who were suffering. And I want to point out that all of us, given the wrong set of circumstances or the challenges in life that many of us are facing, we as human beings can face mental illness or soul illness or heart illness, emotional challenges too. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that he wanted to look at the whole person. And Carl Rogers takes it a step farther. He really supported Maslow's theories, but he wanted it to be even more enhanced. So he wanted to look at how environments could inhibit our growth, in terms of our nature, our nurture, our circumstances with nurturing, as well as how our growth and fulfillment is a God-given right or a human right. He believed, Rogers wrote, that there are 3 conditions really necessary to promote this growth mindset, and that's genuineness, acceptance, and empathy. And so he's best known for his theory of unconditional positive regard. When he was working with clients, he would really listen, and he would interact with them in a very positive way, no matter what they said to him, no matter how they said it. He was there to empathize, take it in, reflect it back, and was able to help people disclose a little better. Now, there were critics, of course, to every theory. And, no matter what you do in life, if it's worth doing, you're going to have critics, and you're also going to have supporters. And so I just want to point out that some of the critics of these approaches felt that it was too wishy-washy, that it wasn't based in something solid and measurable like behavioral psychology. Freud, the Freudians really felt that we were conditioned or attuned to unconscious. The id, ego, superego may be familiar to you, but it was like more of a subconscious thing that drove us. Whereas the humanists really believed that we could acknowledge that and still reach our highest attainment of life. And so many of us are probably familiar with how this has impacted our culture, in Western culture, definitely in America, with practitioners that are pretty famous. Oprah would be a great example, and Hay House, Louise Hay. But there are many, many other authors, and I will mention those at the end. And I just wanted to see if there are any questions and then open it up for discussion.
Thank you ever so much. That was really wonderful, Lani. And to just start us off with a practice in which we were noticing our body sensations, we were noticing any emotions that might have been waving, traveling through, we were noticing any thoughts that were going on, we were noticing our breath, and yet you said we were none of these, that we were the observer of those. And I wonder if whoever it was that was watching the body, the thoughts, the emotions, the breath, might have something to do with what Maslow was talking about with self-actualization, with reaching our highest potential.
Yeah, I would definitely say that is the case. And the more self-aware we are, the more we have the potential for self-actualization and happiness, you know, to make wise choices in the first place, to even know that we have choices. Another criticism that I want to mention that is interesting is some of the researchers who are more cynical or maybe more clinical find humanistic approach to psychology to be too pie in the sky and too airy-fairy or even overly optimistic and not dealing with the evils of human nature. Thinking about the times in which these theories developed, Maslow and Rogers are post-World War II. They're post-Korean War. They're even in the midst of the nuclear explosion after World War II in Japan. And yet they still believe in the goodness and the innate positivity that's possible in human nature. I find that really interesting. And I really believe that the more each of us finds whatever practice works for us to be centered and to be clear, the more we realize we have more in common than we have different.
Hi, I loved your talk. Thank you. I've read a study that says 1/3 of the therapy is about the type of therapy used. 2/3 is about the connection you have with your client. And that when you do have empathy, positive regard, and acceptance, then they are able to change more because they're in a safe atmosphere and not judged, but able to really find their own sense of self and self-actualization. And part of what I was thinking about is I think what's missing in our world today is empathy, positive regard, and acceptance. And that it's just not about science. It is about science. We need to accept science, but it's just not about the method. It's about the kindness of our hearts and the love that we share with each other. And so I think that is what's missing in our society today. And I really do think it's about the connection we make as humans to each other and the love that we share that's going to make the change, either personally in therapy or also within our world. Thank you for your talk.
Hi, Lani. Thank you for your talk. And that was a wonderful comment also. And I'm a little bit familiar with Maslow's basic fundamental teaching in the hierarchy of needs. And so, I was struck by the quote you offered that to paraphrase, that we need to focus on what the healthy human being is in order to understand what is possible in terms of growth and healing and development, human development. And I was wondering if Maslow had some examples that he used in his writings or that he gave to his patients of what he considered to be self-actualized persons that were kind of shown as ideals of what's possible.
Yes, thank you so much, Kirk. So that is indeed the case, that he held up as examples several individuals that he believed exemplified people who had overcome adversity and attained each of these levels in life. And that includes people like Abraham Lincoln, drawing from our history, Thomas Jefferson he included in that, and Eleanor Roosevelt. Yes, I mean, it's lovely to be able to return to a foundation of study that puts forward these kinds of role models. And one of the things that I've really enjoyed doing during the pandemic is watching a series of autobiographies and biographies about artists and musicians. It's been so inspiring to me to realize that the majority of people who attain what we would think of as self-actualization are just like us. They're not geniuses, although we might say they're very intelligent. They are simply people who don't give up. And they're people who also cultivate circles of support and love, just like Diana was saying, that we cultivate love in ourselves and we share that with others. And when we do have those moments of difficulty, we rely on each other to lift each other up. And that's how we also are stubborn. We keep going. We keep doing the work that we're here to do, knowing that there will be, they actually receive quite a bit of criticism from other psychologists. And, if they hadn't believed in what they do, both Rogers and Maslow, they might have been shut down and the rest of the world would not have benefited from what they had to share. All of us have something special that we're here to do on the planet. And really, it's vital that we share that with each other. So thank you so much, Kirk. I really appreciate that question.
And Lani, I believe you have, and Janine could show it for us, a list of characteristics that Carl Rogers said were part of somebody who was self-actualized, part of their makeup.
I want to say such a thank you to the support staff at Still and Moving Center. We wouldn't be able to do half of what we're doing now. I'm so incredibly grateful to all of the staff and other teachers and students. So these are the 5 characteristics outlined in an article about Carl Rogers when I was doing some additional research. So the 5 characteristics outlined here are open to experience, both positive and negative emotions. And that really is subjective. What we would call a negative emotion, for example, fear, might actually have a positive outcome for us. If we're afraid, we're going to get the heck out of there, right? Or if we're angry, it means our boundaries might have been crossed. Those are usually seen as negative, but they're really not. They're not denied. They are worked through and integrated, almost like the painting behind me. It's called Yin Yang Heart, a painting I did in 2011, where it's about accepting the shadow and the light of ourselves, each of ourselves. So another quality is existential living, where you're in touch with different experiences as they occur, avoiding any prejudgment or preconceptions. Now that's easier said than done, right? I mean, we have our filters that we see things through, but ideally when we have practices that bring us to center, to that observer self, that conscious aware self, we're more likely to be able to approach something without a prejudgment or preconception, more open-hearted and open-minded to other ideas, to be able to live fully in the present moment instead of in the past or in the future. The third one, trusting our feelings, instincts, and gut reactions. Your heart, I call it your inner GPS, your heart and your gut, your na'au. And, knowing that each person, each client knows what's right for them usually. They might have like a little voice, almost like the angel and devil on each shoulder, but like an inner voice that tells them, oh, this is a great idea. Oh, this isn't a great idea. But we also have to be mindful that those voices may not be accurate sometimes. Creativity, creative thinking, and risk-taking being the features of a person's life. Not playing it safe. One of the things I really admire about all of our teachers, students, and staff is that we all take risks all the time. Safe risks, but we take risks. And it's a risk to do an online class like this. And, to be able to offer this free is truly generous and very kind. So this involves the ability to adjust and change too, as new experiences come up, not staying stuck in thinking you have to go one way if new ideas or new information presents itself. Living a fulfilled life. So that would be Rogers' version of self-actualization, being happy and satisfied, looking for new challenges and experiences. When I think of that, I immediately think of my dear friend David, who is here. And how he's always setting the bar higher for himself and doing incredible things like running a marathon, just the most incredible person and good friend. So, and many of you know each other and know that each of us does this in our own unique way. So yeah, thank you very much for bringing that screen up.
David.
Lani, thank you so much for the acknowledgement and also for the talk. You touched on something that I wondered if you could elaborate on. I was thinking that in the older models, Freudian, for example, our behavior was driven by something beyond our control, this subconscious mind. And then we started to introduce the idea that we could actually have some effect on how things turned out in our life by taking positive control. And I'm curious about that mechanism between the conscious and subconscious mind. And how do we get a better handle on that, for example? And I wonder if you had any thoughts on that.
I do, and I'm sure our other participants here have some thoughts on that as well. But I want to introduce the idea that humanistic perspective is valuable, but so is Freudian, and so are behavioral therapies. And there are many therapists and coaches like myself. I'm a life coach who trained in a different modality, a different way of training than a therapist would, but a similar path, in the sense that we look at behavior, we look at language, we look at thought processes, and I really focus on the whole person, the holistic view of approaching something. And I often will refer clients who need therapy to a therapist. And then it's up to the client to follow through. But in answer to your question, I would say that there are impulses that are subconscious or unconscious. And they show up in ways that are the banana peels of life, is one way I would put it. And I'll just speak from my own experience with that, of having suppressed memories of childhood abuse in my early childhood, and not even being aware that it had happened until much, much later, when I was safe enough in a safe environment with my family of choice to even be able to begin to address it with therapy and coaching. And it enhances my coaching practice, because I know, and many of us here know, the dark night of the soul. Many of us here, if we're lucky to live long enough and lucky to have enough experiences, have had at least one time where we've been utterly floored and didn't know how to progress. And that's where I really feel the humanistic approach is helpful, because if we dwell only in an unconscious or subconscious mindset, then what do we do about it? You know, we have actually many strengths to address that. And the modern psychologists that I'll mention, in fact, I'll mention right now, the father of positive psychology, Dr. Martin E.P. Seligman, who wrote a wonderful book called Flourish. There's also a biography and sort of autobiography about him called, I've got a stack of books here, The Hope Circuit. He used to study learned helplessness in human beings and animals, but that was so incredibly depressing. And thank God for us and for him, he switched fields 35 years ago and began to study learned optimism. He began to study how our strengths, when we focus on our strengths and the present moment, we are more likely to be able to believe we can make changes in our lives instead of thinking that the world controls us. That said, there are circumstances and events, and of course we don't have control over other people, but we always have control over how we interpret things and the perspective we bring to things. And one of the things I love most about Martin E.P. Seligman's work is he also looks at post-traumatic growth. So we've heard of PTSD. Many of us may have experienced PTSD in a war situation or rape or car crash or any number of traumatic experiences that is sometimes the human experience. But in the research that he and other researchers have done, they've really discovered that, ironically, the more trauma you've had, and not to say we want more trauma, we've had enough, we're strong, but the more trauma you've had, the more potential for resilience and growth. So it's really hopeful. It's actually really inspiring to know that we have the potential through our trauma, if we're mindful, if we receive additional support, be it through a therapist, counselor, clergy, or whatnot, whatever it is that we go and receive support from, that we can actually overcome it and maybe even use it in our daily lives and work.
Robert, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned when your introductory remarks about how this pyramid, there could be actually movement back and forth. And when you talk about trauma, you're kind of talking about going back and the loss maybe of security, and even physical needs won't be met. Maybe a loss of love relationships. These traumas, for instance, sometimes lead to a greater sense of who one is, some actualization of individuality that was not there before. So I was curious whether you had things to say about that, but also, since you're here, I once heard an interview with some people, and they said that self-esteem is overrated in terms of living, that lots of people who don't seem to have a lot of self-esteem actually are very successful in life. So I wondered if you had anything to say about that.
Thank you so much, Robert. I would agree with you, and I would agree with those people. Some of the most humble and least popular people, I guess. Some people who have horrible, crippling anxiety, and people like Abraham Lincoln, who actually suffered from depression, severe depression, have overcome that. And it isn't necessarily linked in such an easy way. I often think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs as more of a model that we can refer to, but that isn't necessarily set in stone or isn't necessarily true for everyone even. And thinking about the pandemic and how many people may have lost their income, their jobs, their housing, these basic underpinnings of our well-being, it makes sense as to why it's been such a difficult time for so many. And yet at the same time, we've seen people take the ball and run with it and overcome that adversity in unique and amazing ways. I know of a person who's gone back to school who would not have otherwise been able to do that because he would have felt responsible to have a full-time job. But because his job was taken away, he had the opportunity. He's like, well, I've always wanted to study computers, and here we go. So there's definitely, it's not a black or white type of proposition for sure. And so a certain level of esteem is a good idea, I think. You have to have a little bit of confidence, but that does not mean that you're always going to be at the top of your game either. A lot of entrepreneurs I've read suffer multiple setbacks and even bankruptcies because they're risk takers. And yet they overcome that by proceeding to continue.
I wanted to, yes, as you say, Lani, open it up to everybody now, who, especially if you haven't had a chance to speak up, to maybe share with us, if you feel comfortable, a time when you felt that some aspect of your potential got released, got revealed to you, got set free, and it allowed you to take off in a way that you had never taken off before. And what caused that? How did that come about for you?
I'll say something. I think this whole time I've kind of been thinking about how I think just the fact that we're all here is like bringing us even closer to the tip of that pyramid. And I think for me, there hasn't been one big thing that has made me think, oh, this is the path that I'm on. And instead, it's just been lots of little things like coming to conversations like this or working at a place like Still and Moving Center, where every day you're having great conversation, like with faculty or students or one another, or the employees. So I think the fact that we're all here and able to converse, and that's for me like one thing that makes me realize, I'm headed up there. If I ever get there on this journey or this life, I don't know, but I think just thinking about it and asking questions and having conversation shows me that I am on the right path. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Miku, go for it.
Oh, I was just going to share the time of when I discovered that I had a gift I didn't realize that I had. It was a surprise. And it came about because of being around people that I trusted and loved, and that I was willing to go outside my comfort zone and try something that I had never done before. And then lo and behold, I had like a gift that I had no idea. Really, I had no idea. And that that is was for guiding meditation. And so the way that it actually happened for me was I had been working with someone for a long time, and he'd been guiding me, and I just knew it so well. It was just in every part of my being. And then one day I was sitting in circle with a very close group of friends, and people were kind of tired. The conversation topic had actually brought up a lot of trauma, a lot of triggering things, and people were totally depleted, and were like, well, what are we going to do? I said, well, I know this meditation that had been taught to me, and then I shared it, and it was a slightly different version, but it ended up being like a 10-15 minute meditation, and there was about 15 people in the room, and we were all sitting down, and one by one they all started lying down until the whole room like was in a little snuggle, like they basically all lied down in Shavasana. It was an you are loved, you are safe meditation. And they all lied down in Shavasana, and I closed the meditation, and then I was kind of sitting there not understanding what was happening. And I think that, that was a moment in my life where I realized, wow, this is something. And I had no idea, but it was just because of this situation and these people, and then the integration from something that had been given to me by a great teacher. So I think that's a moment.
Thank you so much. I wonder if people have the experience of a teacher being the instigator, the catalyst for that awakening to our own potential.
Oh, without question. I recall my first yoga class in college, and sitting in Shavasana at the very end of the very first class. Sit up after Shavasana, and this voice said, "This is the coolest thing I've ever done, and I want to teach this." 47 years later, that's what I enjoy doing most. But it was a teacher who definitely handed that off to me.
Yeah, I also had a similar experience without going into a lot of detail, but it had to do with the ability to write well and to articulate thought well. I was in it's one of the first really large classes that I took at UCSB in political science. And, it's like 300 and something people, and a topic I had never really studied at all. And they had, I think it was a midterm exam in which you had to write an essay. And they were going to read some of the best essays. They chose 7 of the best essays that they were going to share with the class. And then they saved one, which the professor, who I was without doubt the most brilliant man I've ever met in my life, would himself have chosen. So they had the TAs who were responsible for groups of students. They would pick the best. And then the professor would read all of those, and then he would pick the best, right? So, we're really sitting there in the back of the room enjoying these other essays being read out loud. And then they get to the final one. They say, okay, well, so this was the one that was chosen as being the best essay. And they started reading my essay, and I was like, "What? You must be kidding!" And so that was like a turning point for me, because I had never really. I mean, I enjoyed writing, and I had written some poetry and creative writing and so on, but I never really thought of myself as being articulate with writing, and especially in a topic that I had never really studied deeply, except in that class. So. But it was definitely the influence, I would say, of the teacher and the instruction that brought it out.
So remembering that genius comes not from, I mean, there is talent, there's natural talent, right? But it's also inspired by our surroundings, by our parents, by our teachers, and by our fellow human beings. And then it's whether or not we pick up the ball and keep practicing and studying and learning, and giving ourselves a chance to actually take a risk at doing something.
Could I ask for Maurice? I thought I saw him stirring over there as if he was going to share something.
Yes, well, in terms of deficiency and overcoming it, just finding where my internet connection didn't work. So I apologize for being late. In the Eastern tradition, at least in some, the starting point might be to forget yourself, others, just, and I don't think it's necessarily contradictory to understanding areas that you'd like to improve in, or where you do have a mental block, and kind of unraveling it all. But in the Eastern tradition, self-assertion is not necessarily, that can get into egotism kind of fast, asserting your ego. And in the Eastern tradition, I think the way to counteract all that is to serve others. So service, or doing something for someone else, we could call it connecting, but not just connecting, but serving. In other words, having an inner motivation to really try to help someone else. And a lot of times that seems to me as a place where people can get healed. So do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, so knowing that there's a cultural and historical context, there's also gender roles, and beliefs about particular roles that people play, and knowing what is ours to do, knowing in your heart and gut, and maybe that observer self, what is really ours to do. And so I wanted to just provide a variety of modern day positive psychologists and sociologists and theorists who, spiritual practitioners who have come about because of Maslow and Rogers and other practitioners of humanistic approach to psychology. So thank you all so much. It's a joy to see you all.
Yes. Thank you so much, Lani, for giving us a very thorough walk through some of the more positive aspects of today's psychological world, and how we have in many ways transcended beyond just pathologies into a way of looking at human experience from the standpoint of our potential, rather than the standpoint of our pathology. Really, it's quite a remarkable transformation, and thank you for being on the vanguard of that. I want to introduce in advance, because we'll be speaking with her next week, Nicola Johnson, and she is in Woodside, California. And next week, we are going to take up from the Christian tradition, of which she is a reverend, and also has extended beyond into a number of different spiritual practices. And in fact, she, Nicola, what's the name of the place that you've created?
I had a spiritual community called Spirit House.
Spirit House.
But mostly I'm living in India now, at least half of the year. So Spirit House is now, as it's turned out, we all have, but it's become an online community now, rather than an in-person community.
I see. Very good. So we're going to be speaking with Nicola on the idea of the Pilgrim's Progress. Next week marks the anniversary of when the Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan was published sometime in the 1600s, and yet there's still some spiritual relevance for it that we'll be able to take up, since all of us, in a way, are on our own spiritual pilgrimages, and fortunately getting to share them with one another. So we'll look forward very much to conversing with all of you and Nicola next week. And thank you so much again, Lani, for your presentation today. Aloha all.
Thank you, Lani.
Aloha, thank you.
Aloha.
Mahalo, Lani.
This business of connecting online is an interesting idea. Like maybe that we're learning that consciousness does in fact extend far beyond the body. Like how much of our body is really necessary to have this experience, right? Virtually very little.
But somehow it is important to consider, like, what I keep thinking about this, what is my body going through as I am engaging on the computer so much, you know? I mean, just that, yeah, it feels like everything is bodiless, but yet we are embodied in front of these screens doing these things.
We do have to be responsible for that.